So matchmaking has, I would say, always been a pretty big topic of discussion in online multiplayer games. You know, if you've ever followed Call of Duty news or anything like that, you'll know that matchmaking and SBMM and these sorts of things have always been really big topics of discussion on how games actually implement matchmaking, and Arc Raiders, being the game that it is, has a pretty interesting style of matchmaking. So obviously this game is PvPvE, so it's not just player against player, it's not just player against environment, these sorts of things. You actually have both in a singular lobby. However, Arc Raiders did something a little bit interesting to accommodate for the different sorts of play styles in this game, because basically what happened is that this game launched and the devs weren't expecting the player community to actually play the game this way. A couple of months ago, there was an article that basically kind of detailed how the devs during the playtest saw players using more PvP interactions, and then when the game released, everybody was pretty friendly with each other. It was quite a shock to them. So the aggression-based matchmaking system kind of accommodates these different sorts of varied playstyles in this game. There were some changes that were made recently to it as well that are pretty big, and they also clarified quite a lot of details about myths related to the matchmaking systems. So we're going to be discussing all of that here in today's video, but before we do that, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications set to all so you can stay up to date with all of the content here on the channel, and let's just dive right on into it. So basically, Embark clarified here that the raider that you are is basically up to you and your playstyle. They say that topside works because it's unpredictable. You can never be sure if you can trust the people you meet, and this sort of freedom of playstyle and the uncertainty it creates is what they say drives the tension, encounters, and choices that make each run in Arc Raiders feel like its own story. And I have to say, that is probably one of the, in my opinion, biggest strengths about this game, is that even though I'm personally a PvE player, I never know in a lobby if the people around me are PvE players or if they're PvP. I've had both interactions in lobbies before. For the most part, I strive to play PvE because I just have more fun with it, but at the same time, you know, there's always that uncertainty when you're playing any match where you're not just afraid of the arcs, but you kind of have to be cautious around other people. They're saying here though, at the same time, they don't want dedicated PvP players to consistently steamroll raiders who just aren't interested in PvP or are still discovering the game, finding their footing, that sort of thing. So they say that matchmaking is built around two goals. The first one is fairness. So they say they do their best to match players who have a similar likelihood of succeeding in the round. One simple example, they prioritize matching equal squad sizes where possible. And then the second thing here is enjoyment. They say they do their best to match players who are likely to have fun together. So they found that matching players based on playstyle drives enjoyment and reduces friction. And they said, like any matchmaking system, they pursue those goals while respecting real constraints such as matchmaking time and latency. So they basically say that playstyle-based matchmaking is sort of the way that they operate their system. They said that they take multiple factors into account when forming a lobby, and one of the strongest is your playstyle across previous rounds, especially as it relates to how you engage with other raiders. So they say here it's important to understand that the playstyle is more of a scale. It's not necessarily just you're a PvP player, you're a PvE player, you're aggressive, you're chill. It's not like a binary sort of thing. They say that some raiders are almost always cooperative, some raiders are highly engaged in PvP, but most raiders fall somewhere in between, maybe friendly until threatened, opportunistic, cautious, unpredictable, etc. So they say here that their system tries to place you with players who are as close to you on that scale as possible, but they still keep topside from being completely unpredictable. So there's an image here, it's a graph that basically just kind of shows the matchmaking profile distribution, and they're showing that, for instance, a specific player here that they've highlighted is someone who's more cooperative, and so they try to not really match people that are unlikely, so the more PvP focused types of players. So they say here that similarity is likely but not guaranteed. So you have a higher chance of being matched with raiders whose past playstyle is similar, and a lower chance of being matched with raiders whose playstyle is very different, but it's not guaranteed. So you may still get a PvP player in a PvE lobby. And then they say here as well that your behavior shapes your future lobbies gradually. If you change how you play, the kinds of raiders you tend to meet will gradually shift over time, and your behavior influences what's most likely, but again, it's not going to lock you into a single experience. They said here this is why they see a wide range of interactions. They said here that some outcomes are rarer than others, but they're all part of what makes each round a unique adventure. So basically the whole point is that they just don't want it to be the same every single round. They still want to give you variety in gameplay. You know, I've had rounds where people avoid each other. I've had rounds where, you know, there's that one person who's PvP. I've had rounds where you have people help each other out defeating arcs. For instance, in the new Riventides map, I was in a match once where basically a bunch of people were doing the beachcombing thing, so nobody was really messing with anybody. Everyone was just kind of running around the beach trying to find stuff with their metal detectors. I've had an interaction before where I was downed and a random raider came and revived me and just ran off, which was pretty cool. So there are different sorts of things that I've seen in this game that I think make it really interesting. So they also said they want to clear up some common myths and misconceptions basically. So the first thing is there are not only two kinds of lobbies, either friendly or aggressive. It's a scale like they've basically just kind of clarified with that chart. One shot or elimination doesn't immediately put you in a PvP focused lobby. So the matchmaking doesn't overreact to a single moment. Instead it looks at patterns, and so changes are gradual, not instant. They said there are no PvE only lobbies or servers where other raiders will never attack you. So there have been some people that say, well, I only play PvE and still I've gotten down by another raider before. That's to be expected. It's not a guarantee that you're going to be matched with people just like you, but the vast majority of the time you probably just will be with players who are like you. So they said here as well that end of round feedback doesn't affect matchmaking, so whatever you write there, that's not going to affect what happens in your next round. That's just for them to kind of gather data. And then your loadout doesn't affect matchmaking, so it's not driven by your kit. They don't scale the lobby difficulty based on how much your loadout costs. The only thing that the loadout does is if you're using the free kit, you're not really as likely to get into a full round as someone who is using a custom kit. So you might end up in a game that only has 15 minutes left when you're using a free kit, compared to if you're using a full kit, you'll probably end up in a lobby that has 20 to 30 minutes left, that sort of thing. That's the only thing I've seen that loadouts actually differ in terms of matchmaking. They said here that patches and updates don't reset your matchmaking profile, so your history carries across patches. You may notice rougher matches in the first few minutes after an update, but that's just because the pool is small while players are still updating, but as more raiders come online, it should balance itself out. They also said here looting a knocked out player doesn't affect your matchmaking, so if you see a downed raider who's been knocked out and you take their loot, that's not going to affect your matchmaking. It's only what you do with other raiders that's the biggest impact. Then they don't matchmake based only on the squad leader, so if you're in a squad and the squad leader is a PvP person and then everyone else is a PvE person, then, you know, they're going to take into account everyone's playstyle, not just the squad leader. And then turning crossplay on or off doesn't impact the level of cooperation or PvP in the round. So basically they're saying that it just doesn't guarantee what your encounters are going to be like, and it doesn't really do much other than changing who's in the matchmaking pool. So if you're someone that turns crossplay off, then the only difference that you're going to find is that you're only playing against people who are on that console, for instance, or on PC, whatever it may be. I always play with crossplay on. I know that some people like to turn crossplay off because they find it hard to compete when you're on controller with someone who's on PC, mouse and keyboard. I personally play on PlayStation, so I've never really had much of a difficulty, but again, that might just be because I'm PvE mostly. And then these are the matchmaking changes. So there are two really big ones that have affected and will adjust the way matchmaking works. And it seems like so far they've been pretty popular with people who are more PvE based, because it definitely does benefit them a lot. So they said here the first thing is defending yourself is no longer treated the same as starting a fight. So previously your playstyle didn't capture whether you started a PvP encounter or merely defended yourself. This meant cautious raiders could be treated as more PvP focused than they actually are. Now the two are treated differently. If you're starting a PvP encounter, that's not the same as defending yourself if someone tries to attack you. So that's definitely one of the biggest changes, and I would say probably the most welcome change. I think a lot of people are really happy about this, especially if they're PvE focused. And then the second thing here is low activity rounds carry less weight in your playstyle history. So rounds with little topside interaction, such as spawning and surrendering immediately, used to impact players' estimated playstyle more than expected. So they're reducing their weight, and that's going to help the system. So these things have been live now, and they're going to keep fixing them as they see, you know, how things play out. They basically said they just want to make the game more fair, more fun, and more rewarding. And the other day, obviously, they announced the new anti-cheat measures. So it seems like they're really working hard at trying to fix these things and adjust the way matchmaking works, adjust the way this game is functioning, that sort of a thing. And I think so far they're doing a pretty good job with this game. You know, obviously people were kind of concerned about the whole recent change in update schedules, but the CEO of Embark did say that they are committed to releasing content, and just because there's going to be 2 major drops does not mean that we're not getting other content throughout the months. So, I mean, obviously we just saw they dropped the 1.29 update, which had a ton of fixes in it. We're getting new content. We got a new trader. It's just, it seems like they're kind of reserving maps and these sorts of huge additions to the story for those big updates, which hopefully that means they're just going to add more. We're going to be getting a roadmap soon that's going to basically break down everything that we need to know moving forward. And they said that the roadmap this time is going to be more detailed than the last roadmap. There's a survey as well for the matchmaking over on the R Creators website if you do want to give some feedback on how you feel about these changes. But yeah, pretty interesting update here on the matchmaking. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Leave a like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications set to all so you can stay up to date with all of the content here on the channel. And that's all for today, folks.